Hello, everybody. I'm back. It's been a long time since I've actually sat down in front of the camera and recorded one of these videos. It's been a few months actually, and in that time, life has just been crazy for me. I kicked it off by landing a new job. In that time, I've also moved into a new house, as I'm sure you've noticed. And last but not least, you've probably seen that I've dropped a couple songs. So yeah, that was something. But today I'm really excited to be sat down here in the studio seat in front of the camera making a how-to video. As the title suggests, we're going to be making bassline drum and bass. Now the style is probably the furthest thing from my own personal style, but I love making it. It's a heap of fun and I love listening to it too. I've sort of styled this around guys like K9 and K-Motions and even the OG Mackie G from back in the day. So yeah, it's a super fun genre. So I reckon let's not waste any more time and let's just get into a bit of doof. Alright, let's go. FL Studio, headphones activated. We on, baby. Alright, so first things first, we're going to want to set our tempo to a nice drum and bass tempo there. We're going 175 for this one. I thought that was just perfect. Alright, the first thing we're going to do is just set the vibe, and the best way to do this in this genre is to just make a sort of catchy bass line to get you going. So I've just sort of thrown this together. It's just going to give us a sort of direction for our track. So you can already hear that sort of bassline sound in there. This will probably get converted into sort of our main bassline in the drop. You can see that this is filtering in, so as we progress throughout the song, we're sort of going to open it up and the grittiness of that bass is going to come through. So this bass is a super simple little saw bass, just a bit of detune, two saw layers, some chorus distortion, and a compressor just to make it nice and gritty. Alright, we want to keep rolling with the vibes here. It's a Savage tutorial, so of course we're throwing in a bit of atmosphere there. And then a drum and bass genre classic, that little hi-hat. Another cool little atmospheric element I'm going to add is just this little pluck sound. It actually sounds sort of like Porter Robinson. I feel like that's a Porter Robinson song right there. I don't know. But this is just a little pluck preset. Super simple. What I'm going to do with these atmospheres is actually filter them in. Filter in the low end and filter in the high end. So I've just got them on a bus filter, as you can see here. They're going into this Atmos filter. And this just looks like this. You'll see it'll just open up and the sound will open up too. Sounds magic. Alright, we want to put together a sort of nice opening to the song. So I've just thrown in a few elements here. We've got a big boom. We've got some risers and downlifters here just to sort of progress the song, make it nice and interesting. So everything together in this intro just sounds a little bit like this. Alright, now that we've got our intro, we want to keep the ball rolling and we want to go into a sort of... Alright, now that we've got our intro, we want to keep the ball rolling and we want to go into a sort of a verse section. So I found a nice little vocal. This comes from a Splice vocal pack. Just search up that if you want to find it. Great pack. Would recommend. So what I've made here is a little vocal tail to sort of transition into the vocal, and then we just hit the vocal into a nice verse.
I found myself in the dark of the night, When I was lost, needed a reason to fight.
Right, so basically we just keep our same intro elements, and then you'll see that I've just got little downlifters and little riser type things just to keep the momentum going and keep it interesting and make it sound full.
I found myself in the dark of the night. When I was lost, needed a reason to fight. Cried out my tears, then they started to dry. I found me, all I need.
Alright, we're really cracking into it now. We're moving on to our build-up section already. This is going beautifully. Alright, to go into the build-up section, I'm going to cut my bass here, and I'm going to cut the little hi-hats, and we're just sort of going to have our atmosphere. I've also put a little filter in here, so the atmosphere sort of gets sucked away a little and then comes back in. Right, for the first part of this build-up section, we've just got some kicks and claps that are filtering in. They start very far in the background, using an EQ filter to cut the low and cut the high. Of course, we've just got a bunch of little risers and downlifters and impacts just to keep that energy up and keep it interesting. The key to this build-up section is having the drop bassline filtering in and really teasing that drop. You can see the array of filters I've got on here. I've got a reverb filter, I've got EQ filters just to really push that bassline into the background so it's not coming in real heavy. It's just sort of sitting there teasing you, teasing what's to come. We're just rounding off this build-up section. It's actually quite simple from here. We're just gonna keep our drums going. We're gonna add some snares. We're gonna add a little sub drop. We're gonna add a bunch of beefy risers just to really build that tension. We're also keeping the vocal going throughout this whole build-up section. It's sort of acting as like a chorus section, I guess. So all things together in this build-up section sounds a little like this.
Wait for my life to begin. I can't explain how, but I feel it in the air as it touches my skin. And it all starts right now.
Right, it is time for this bassline drum and bass drop. Let's get right into it. So I'm going to start with the drums because, you know, drum and bass drums sort of that same boom-ch, 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 you know, the familiar drum and bass beat. We're going to throw some hi-hats in there to add a little top end in that drum beat. And I've also got an extra hi-hat loop in there just to add a little more zing to the beat. So I'm going to introduce all the little ear candy and drum elements before we actually throw that bass line in there, because it's really important to have that bass. Well, not exactly that bass, but you know, bass, B-A-S-E. Anyway, you want to have that support from all your other elements first before you throw your big heavy bass line on there, because if you just have a bass line and a sub, it's going to sound very empty. So what we're adding in here is just some white noise risers. This is just adding that top end in and just sort of sitting out the sides of your ears. Then we've got a couple of vocal beds. They're just sort of repeating phrases, just acting as a bit of sound, you know? Alright, so if I play all of these little support elements and the drums together, it should sound pretty full already and pretty energetic without the bass line actually in there. Alright, so now that we've got the support, we need the main event. We need that thick, juicy, dirty, filthy bass line to come in there and just slap you in the face, you know? Slap you. Alright, so this bass line is actually not as hard as it may seem. It's actually a very simple sound to design. So here is the main bass line. You can see we've got a sine wave here. It's down 2 octaves, and then we have FM from B. B is just this basic MDC shape, and then we've got a little bit of noise over here, and they're all connected to LFO1, and that's controlling the volume, as you'll see here. Then we go into the EQ side. So this EQ has this little notch, and what I've done is just make this notch, you up the gain, then you just find a frequency that just sits perfectly with your ears, that just sounds just nice. Then you whack a tube distortion on it, full drive, and you get something pretty dirty and pretty nice. You'll notice that this EQ filter is sort of moving around a little. So to make that happen and to keep that EQ in the sweet spot for every note that you play, you go over to this little note tool here, drag it over onto the frequency, and that's going to move the frequency ever so slightly so that sweet spot of EQ just remains in the sweet spot. We go down and put a little bit of hyper here. You can see not too much mixed in, but just a little bit to give it some width, obviously a little bit of compression. Another element to the sound design process is with this LFO1, you'll notice that the rate of how fast the LFO moves is changing. The easiest way I've found to make the LFO go where I want is to go over here, this little drop down arrow, go browse parameters, and then you go over to the rate here, click on it, find it over on the left side, create automation clip, and I do it for each of the places I want it to hit. So I've got 1/8 triplet, 1/8, 1/8 triplet, a quarter, 1/8. So as we move through the project here, you'll see the rate changing and the sound changing. So this bass line is a pretty simple MIDI design. I've just sort of drawn that out, trial and error a little. So I do have a second layer on this bass line. You can see that it's very similar to the first because you want the sounds to be somewhat the same. You'll notice when I play it, it does sound quite a lot different. So what the second layer is just a bit of top end and a bit of width. It gives the original sound just a little bit more depth and fullness. So you can see I've basically done exactly the same with the sound design. And then the magic is over here in the post-processing, where I've just made it a little bit wider and then got a bit of reverb on there, so it just has a little bit more room. So if you play the first sound by itself, it sounds beefy, but maybe not as full as it could be. Now we'll add the second sound in as the layer. It's going to be very nice. Right, last but not least in the sound design process is the sub, a very simple sine wave sub, and that is just literally following the bass line. So that bass line loop plays for, what's that, 8 bars, 16 bars, whatever it is. And then we go into a little bit of a transition into the second half of the drop. I've automated on some flanger here to the bass line so it acts as sort of a transition, and I've just got my drums stomping in there. So that flanger is literally just a fruity flanger that I've automated on. After that little fill/transition section, we're going to go into just a little altered bass line. So as you can see, I've just made a few adjustments to the MIDI here, and we've also done a few adjustments to the LFO. And then for the second half of the drop, we just go back to the OG bass line, just play it out until the end. So that brings us to the end of this tutorial. It's been really, really good to be back in the studio, back making random beats, random genres. I did have a good little reset over that time, but now I'm ready to get back into making consistent videos again and exploring new genres and different styles. If you haven't listened to my 2 songs I've released, go over to wherever you listen to music and just put them on repeat, you know, bump those streaming numbers up, you know, always helps. As always, guys, I hope you enjoy the final result. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and maybe you learned something new. I don't know. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, it's been an honor. I thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.
In the dark of the night, when I was lost, needed a reason to fight. Cried out my tears, then they started to dry. I found me, all I need. No more sorries, no more pain, no more us for you to blame. Just our song that we let play again and again and again.